Hey there, Roothaven Grounds family. Today I'm going to share something that completely transformed my gardening game. And honestly, I wish I'd discovered it years ago. You know that heartbreaking moment when you're standing in your garden, looking at soil that's become so depleted it might as well be dirt from a parking lot? I've been there, and I'm about to introduce you to a liquid gold that farmers and gardeners have been using for literally thousands of years to bring dead soil back to life. I'm talking about compost tea, and before you roll your eyes thinking this is just another gardening trend, let me tell you why this ancient practice is making such a massive comeback in modern gardens. Here's the thing about dead soil that most people don't realize. It's not just lacking nutrients. Dead soil has lost its entire biological ecosystem. Think of healthy soil as a thriving city with billions of microscopic workers, and dead soil as an abandoned ghost town. You could dump all the fertilizer in the world onto that ghost town, but without the living organisms to process and deliver those nutrients to your plants, you're essentially throwing money into a black hole. Compost tea is different because it's alive. When you brew compost tea properly, you're creating a liquid suspension packed with beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. These aren't just nutrients, they're the workforce that rebuilds your soil's entire ecosystem from the ground up. It's like injecting millions of skilled construction workers directly into that ghost town and watching them rebuild everything overnight. I'll never forget the first time I used compost tea on a section of my garden that had been completely exhausted from years of growing heavy feeders. Within just about 2 weeks, I saw changes that, honestly, normally take an entire season to achieve. Plants that had been limping along suddenly stood upright. Their leaves darkened to a rich green, and growth just exploded. It felt like magic, but really, it was actually just biology doing what it does best. Our ancestors didn't have laboratories or microscopes, but, they knew something special happened when they soaked compost in water and applied it to their crops. What they discovered through generations of observation, we can now explain through soil science. When you brew compost tea, you're creating the perfect conditions for beneficial microorganisms to multiply exponentially. A single teaspoon of good compost might contain 1 billion bacteria, but after 24 hours of proper brewing with oxygen and food sources, that same teaspoon of compost tea can contain tens of billions of these beneficial organisms. These microbes do several critical things in your soil. First, they compete with and suppress disease-causing organisms. It's kinda like having a security force that keeps the bad guys out. Second, they break down organic matter and make nutrients available to plants in forms they can actually absorb. Third, they improve soil structure by creating aggregates, which means better water retention, better drainage, and easier root penetration all at once. The fungi in compost tea, especially mycorrhizal fungi, form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, basically extending your plant's root system by hundreds of times. They trade nutrients and water for sugars from the plant, creating an underground network that, some scientists actually call the Wood Wide Web. Now let's get into the practical stuff because I know you're itching to try this. Brewing compost tea isn't complicated, but there are some key steps you need to follow to get it right. You'll need high-quality compost as your starting material. This is crucial. If your compost is anaerobic or poorly made, your tea will be too. Good compost should smell earthy and pleasant, never foul or ammonia-like. I use my own finished compost from my pile that's been cooking for at least 6 months, but you can also purchase quality compost from reliable sources. The basic recipe I use is about 1 part compost to 5 parts water. So for every gallon of water, I use roughly a cup of compost. But here's the critical part that many people miss. You need to actively aerate the mixture. Beneficial organisms are aerobic, meaning they need oxygen. Without constant aeration, your brew can quickly turn anaerobic, creating a putrid mess that will harm rather than help your plants. I use an aquarium pump with an air stone, the same kind you'd use in a fish tank, and I let it bubble away for 24 to 36 hours. You can also add food sources for the microbes during brewing. I typically add a tablespoon of unsulfured molasses per gallon of water, which feeds the bacteria, and sometimes a small amount of kelp meal or fish hydrolysate to encourage fungal growth. Temperature matters too. The ideal brewing temperature is between 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Too cold, and the microbes reproduce slowly. Too hot, and you can kill beneficial organisms or encourage the wrong types. Here's where I see many gardeners go wrong. They brew this beautiful living compost tea and then let it sit for a week before using it. Here's the hard truth. Compost tea has a very short shelf life. Once you stop aerating it, the beneficial organisms start dying off rapidly. You need to use your compost tea within about 4 hours of finishing the brewing process for maximum benefit. For dead or severely depleted soil, I apply compost tea as a soil drench. I use a watering can and soak the soil thoroughly, making sure the tea penetrates at least 6 inches deep. This is where the microbes need to establish themselves. For a typical garden bed, I use about a gallon of compost tea per 10 square feet of soil. You can also apply compost tea as a foliar spray, which I do for established plants showing signs of stress or disease. The microbes colonize the leaf surfaces and provide protection against pathogens. Just make sure to spray early in the morning or late in the evening to avoid leaf burn, and always strain your tea through cheesecloth if you're using a sprayer to prevent clogging. The frequency of application depends on your soil's condition. For severely depleted soil, I apply compost tea weekly for the first month, then switch to every 2 weeks for the next couple of months. After that, monthly applications during the growing season are usually sufficient to maintain a healthy soil ecosystem. Let me be straight with you about expectations. Compost tea isn't a synthetic fertilizer that gives you an instant green up. It's a biological approach that rebuilds soil health from the foundation up. That said, the results can be remarkably fast for a natural method. In my experience with truly dead soil, you'll see visible improvements in plant vigor within 2 to 3 weeks of the first application. The soil itself will start changing texture, becoming more crumbly and, easier to work. You'll notice better water penetration, and if you're paying attention, you'll see earthworms starting to return to areas where they were previously absent. By the end of a growing season with regular compost tea applications, soil that was biologically dead can be transformed into living productive earth. I've taken hardpan clay that water would just sit on top of and turned it into soil that drains beautifully, while still holding moisture exactly where plant roots can access it. Plants growing in tea-treated soil show increased disease resistance, better drought tolerance, and often more vigorous growth without any synthetic inputs. The flavor of vegetables improves noticeably, and flowers bloom more prolifically. What excites me most about compost tea is honestly the cumulative effect. Every single application adds to the biological diversity and activity in your soil, and that's just amazing. It's really an investment that keeps paying dividends, unlike synthetic fertilizers that need constant reapplication and, can actually degrade soil health over time. I've been using compost tea in parts of my garden for 5 years now, and those areas require less and less intervention each season. The soil is so alive and balanced that it largely takes care of itself. I spend less time fighting pests and diseases, less money on inputs, and less effort overall while getting better results. Listen, I know it might seem like extra work to brew compost tea when you could just buy a bag of fertilizer, but here's what I've learned. Working with nature instead of against it always wins in the long run. Compost tea isn't just a quick fix, It's a fundamental shift in how you approach soil health and plant nutrition. Start with one small area of your garden, especially a section that's been struggling. Brew up a batch, apply it, and watch what happens. I think you'll be amazed at how this ancient liquid brings your soil back to life. If this information helped you, do me a favor and subscribe to Roothaven Grounds for more practical, science-backed gardening advice that actually works. Share this with a fellow gardener who's struggling with poor soil. Together we can grow better gardens by growing better soil, one batch of compost tea at a time. Now get out there and start brewing. Your soil is waiting to come back to life.